The trains had stopped running on time in Europe long before the surrender. But in Iowa, in the summer of 1945, the freight rolled like clockwork. Flat cars loaded with tractors and seed, boxcars stacked with flour and canned peaches. The rhythm of abundance seemed indecent to some of the townspeople when the county fairground turned POW camp took in its newest batch. 52 German women, most of them auxiliaries and Red Cross nurses, captured near Le Havre and trucked through depots that smelled of diesel, chloride, and rain. They arrived to a place where the barns were full. The rivers ran clear, and the sky, huge and unbothered, seemed to insist that life had always been like this. They were not treated like the men in the camps farther south, who had tried to tunnel under fence lines with spoons. These women were assigned lighter work, kitchen shifts, laundry details, and when farmers requested them, field labor. The army capped the hours, posted the rates, and sent the wages, not to the women directly, but to a camp ledger they could draw on for soap, stationery, a ribbon, a tin of salve. The guards recited the rules the same way they recited grace in the mess hall. No fraternization, no contraband, no leaving your work group, no walking home with the harvest crew. The rules were easy to remember and difficult to interpret, like all rules meant to police the ordinary kindnesses of ordinary people. The camp occupied the fairgrounds' horse barns and exhibition halls. Stalls became sleeping bays, fitted with bunk frames made by a local carpenter who insisted on the right length for a decent night's rest. The women scrubbed their sections with lye on Mondays, the day the laundry truck came for linens. On Wednesdays, a chaplain with a round, flushed face offered an ecumenical service and a stack of hymnals with most of the German words misspelled. On Fridays after dinner, the radio in the mess hall played K. Kaiser. Then a block of news read briskly by a woman with a voice so crisp it could cut paper. During the weather report, someone always sighed, as if the certainty of tomorrow's sunshine were an affront. Hildy arrived with a hand-stitched kit of needles and thread and a canvas satchel stamped DRK. Her hands were compact and precise, the hands of someone who could tie a bandage in the dark. She had known ruins and chalk dust and the burnt sugar smell of bombed bakeries. Now she woke to the sweet stink of manure and the clean bite of lye. She hated to admit that the order of the place soothed her. In the long barn corridor of cots, she and the others arranged small altars, photographs, a chipped teacup with a painted violet, a pocket calendar opened to a month already lived through. It felt dangerous to love anything again, even something so small. Gerda, who had been a switchboard operator and never stopped listening for a tone that meant connection, found a way to greet the guard. Private Jenkins, without conceding anything. "Guten Morgen, Private," she said every day in a tone that carried both politeness and resistance. Jenkins, who was 20 and had never been east of the Mississippi before the army, tried out the words in reply, turning them over like unfamiliar tools. He had been told the women were not dangerous. He had also been told that danger did not always look like danger. On the morning they were sent to the Peterson farm, the sergeant read the names of those assigned to the truck bed, his voice tapping along the list. The air already had heat in it. The women pulled on their gray work jackets and tied scarves over their hair. They climbed up, careful of their hemlines and of the splinters in the slats, and sat with their knees locked, not touching, as if each body were an island that could not afford to drift. Jenkins climbed in last, his rifle slung but safety on, and nodded in a way that asked for silence, without using the word. The truck rattled past the outskirts of town. 2 grain elevators like blunt pencils stuck in the earth, a Sinclair station with a red ball sign, a line of houses with porches and low-slung swings. An old woman on a stoop lifted her chin in a greeting that was not a greeting. A boy on a bicycle rode alongside for a block, then peeled away when the driver hit the horn with 2 friendly taps. When the truck turned onto the Petersons' long dirt lane, the fields opened into rows like careful handwriting, corn as tall as a man and tasseled, soybeans in thick green squares, a garden heavy with tomatoes. The barn wore a fresh coat of red like a church dress. A windmill ticked softly, as if it were keeping time for the whole place. Hilda's mouth tasted suddenly of something she could not name that was not quite envy and not quite ache. Bill Peterson waited in the yard with a bandana in his back pocket and the posture of someone who measured, time in chores completed. He had a farmer's eyes, quick, totaling. He scanned the women, counted the hands, guessed at who could lift, who could sort, who could be trusted with the gate. Beside him, his son, Tom, 16 and sharp with summer, bounced on the balls of his feet. Tom waved too enthusiastically. He had the American knack for friendliness that could be either charity or challenge. "Morning," Bill said to Jenkins, then to the women. Slower. "Guten Morgen." He pronounced it like gravel in his mouth. A smile tugged briefly at the corner of Hilda's face before she tamped it down. She couldn't afford to be amused by him. They were split into teams, 2 for the chicken houses to gather and sort eggs, 4 to the milking parlor to scrub down the stanchions, the rest to the north field where the sweet corn lay in long, generous rows. Iowa field corn, hard, dented, meant for the silo, dominated most farms. But the Petersons reserved a stretch each year for sweet corn that hit its window of perfection and then disappeared like a good mood. Bill led the field crew down a path edged with Queen Anne's lace. "Twist and pull," he said, demonstrating. "If it's ready, it'll let go." He gripped an ear and turned. It released with a soft, satisfying pop. "See the silk? Brown, not green. Feel the tip. Full, not soft." His instructions landed in English, then in the translator's German, then in the women's fingers. Hilda took her place at the edge of a row. She pushed leaves aside with her forearm and reached in. The plant's skin rasped against her knuckles like a cat's tongue. She twisted, felt the small, meaningful resistance, twisted again, and the ear surrendered. The motion had the ring of competence. It was close enough to the memory of rolling a bandage or pulling on surgeon's gloves that her body recognized it as worthy. For the next hour, the women worked down their rows, filling baskets, swapping them for empty ones. The field hummed with bees and with a language that didn't need verbs. Here, now, full again. Gerda kept count in murmurs. Elsa, who had been too quiet since they arrived at the camp, began to hum a hymn her mother had liked, and then caught herself, cheeks flushing as though she had revealed a secret. Tom walked the rows in a zigzag, carrying a canteen and a stack of paper cups. He offered water the way some boys offered jokes, often in case the first time hadn't landed. "It's cold," he'd say, unnecessary and earnest. When a red-tailed hawk circled and cried, heads lifted, the universal response to a predator's announcement. When the noon whistle sounded from the distant cannery, several women flinched before laughing softly at themselves. Habits of fear were useful until they were not. By mid-afternoon, the wagons were heaped with green. The heat settled onto shoulders and into the smalls of backs. Even under scarves, hairline curls frizzed. Sweat found the long route along spine lines and became salt. Jenkins, to his credit, kept a respectful distance, a presence without interruption. Once, seeing a woman hesitate with a basket too heavy for her frame, he stepped in with a small, practical nod and took one handle so the lift was shared. She did not thank him, and he did not look at her when they moved. On a break under the cottonwood by the lane, Bill passed around hard cookies from a tin. "Mrs. Peterson's," he said, though she was in town helping at the church pantry. and would not be back until later. The women accepted, careful with crumbs. Tom ran a hose to the edge of the yard, letting it sputter and then stabilize into a clear, tame snake. He cupped his hand for each woman to drink, a small ritual of trust that had to be performed again and again to be believed. They were packing the last baskets when the smell reached them. Smoke, not the sharp alarm of something wrong, but the friendly resinous sweetness of a farm fire. Tom was stacking split wood in a horseshoe of bricks. He had dragged out a wire grate from behind the shed, banged it clean against a post, and set it across the makeshift pit. Bill had a burlap sack filled with corn ears he'd culled from the best rows, their silks already whisked away like gray hair from a forehead. He tossed a few ears directly onto the grate, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. The women watched, skeptical as cats. Corn was a plant they knew in the way. You know a neighbor you never speak to. In Bavaria and Saxony, maize grew in scattered plots, its hard kernels ground into coarse meal or chopped for silage. In plenty of villages, children learned early that the golden ears were for pigs, not for plates. Hilda felt the old reflex rise to her lips, the one that would have turned what she saw into a joke before someone else could. She swallowed it. The day had been long, and her humor had earned nothing. Bill waved Jenkins over and spoke low. Jenkins hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Mr. Peterson says," he began, cheeks a shade pinker than the heat warranted, "if you'd like to stay a bit, have a bite, for your work." He didn't add that he'd already asked the sergeant on the morning detail and been told it was permitted so long as the guard remained, so long as nothing inappropriate occurred, so long as everyone remembered which side of the fence they were on. Even here, out in the open where there was no fence to point at, the women exchanged looks that compressed years of training into a handful of gestures. Accepting food could mean obligation. It could mean indebtedness, or mockery, or story. It could mean nothing, just heat and hunger answered. Gerda lifted a shoulder. "Your call." Elsa studied the sky, as if it had an opinion. The smell from the grill thickened. Grass sweet, butter not yet melted, something brown and good. Hilda was the first to nod. Not agreement exactly, but the decision to step into whatever came next. The long day in the field had made her arms pleasantly heavy, like after a swim in the old quarry. She recognized that in this country work ended with a pause, a brief ceremony of food and benches and the comparison of aches. In her country, work had simply ended, or it hadn't, depending on whether the sirens came. "All right," she said to Jenkins in measured English. "A bit." Bill took that as a yes for everyone, and, in a way, it was. The group moved toward the yard. Tom stood by with a stick and a boy's display of competence, rolling the corn to char and blister in even turns. He set a block of butter on the porch railing where the sun would soften it into something obedient. He lined up a row of salt shakers like soldiers and grinned at his own arrangement. As the women drew closer, Gerda leaned toward Hilda. "See, for Brennanus," she whispered, a smile tugging despite herself. "They're burning it." Hilda felt the old line rise, animal feed, and set it carefully on her tongue, like a coin she might spend later. For now, she sat on a rough plank bench in the shade of the cottonwood, hands quiet in her lap, a stranger to the ritual, but not unwilling to learn its steps. Across the yard, Bill raised the first ear with a pair of tongs, steam lifting from the split husk, and the afternoon seemed to gather itself around the small, improbable invitation of a meal. The sun slid low over the Iowa horizon, laying a soft orange sheen across the Peterson farm. The day's labor had drawn sweat and silence from everyone, and the smell of soil and sweet corn clung to the women's clothes like a stubborn memory. They had filled wagon after wagon with golden ears, and now, as if by some ritual they didn't yet understand, those same ears were being laid directly onto a grill over crackling wood. To Hilda and the others, the scene was nothing short of absurd. "Sehen Sie sich das an," Gerda muttered, leaning on the fence post with folded arms. "They're burning it, like they don't know what to do with it." "They're feeding it to themselves," Elsa replied with a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Das ist Viehfutter." Animal feed. The phrase passed from mouth to mouth like a shared joke, each woman trying not to laugh too loudly under the watchful eye of Private Jenkins. Even Hilda, who usually clung to a quiet reserve, couldn't suppress a smile. Back home, corn like this was chopped into silage, soaked, and shoveled into troughs. Only pigs and cows would eat whole ears. Human beings? Never. Yet here stood the Petersons, tall, sun-browned, and cheerful, preparing this animal feed as though it were a banquet dish. Bill Peterson poked at the corn with a pair of tongs, rolling each ear carefully over the flames. Tom brushed melted butter over the kernels with a small pastry brush, whistling a tune that none of the women recognized. The butter hissed as it touched the hot surface, sending up clouds of savory steam that mingled with the sweetness of roasting corn. Hilda inhaled and paused. It smelled good. That simple fact unsettled her. Corn was not supposed to smell good. It was supposed to smell like barns and silage pits, like heavy wet feed, not like roasted sugar and smoke. The aroma carried a kind of defiant comfort, and it made her stomach, which she had learned to keep quiet through worse conditions, stir in anticipation. "Don't they have proper food?" asked Inga, one of the younger women, barely 20, her voice tinged with mockery and curiosity all at once. "They won the war," Gerda replied, shrugging. "And this is what they eat? Perhaps we lost to a nation of cows." The group burst into quiet, conspiratorial laughter. Even Jenkins, who didn't speak German well, caught enough of their tone to know they were teasing. He didn't intervene, perhaps because he sensed that mockery, small and harmless as it was one of the few dignities they still had. Tom noticed the whispers and turned with a mischievous smile. "What's so funny?" he called over in his clear, youthful English. "They're laughing at your supper." Jenkins translated with a grin. "They say it's for animals." Tom grinned wider and held up a glistening ear of corn, its golden surface flecked with brown char. "Well," he said, his eyes glinting with humor, "then call me a cow, because this cow's about to eat real good." The boy's lightheartedness cut through the tension like a breeze through tall grass. The women, caught off guard by his easy humor, laughed again, this time without the bitterness that usually clung to their laughter. Even Hilda felt a reluctant warmth spread through her chest. The boy didn't seem to care that they were enemies, or perhaps he didn't see them that way at all. They gathered near the long wooden table beneath a stand of elm trees. It was nothing fancy, just a plank table with mismatched chairs and a few old crates turned into benches. But to women who had eaten from tin mess kits under the eyes of guards, it might as well have been a restaurant. Tom and Bill brought out a stack of plates, a crock of salt, and a bowl of soft, golden butter. A jug of cold buttermilk sweated in the shade. The table was humble, but it spoke of something that none of the women had felt in a long time. Hospitality. Bitte, Bill said, his German clumsy but sincere. You eat for work today. They hesitated. Accepting food from an enemy was a complicated thing. Pride whispered one thing, hunger another. In the end, hunger was louder, and curiosity was its companion. Hilda reached out first. The ear of corn was hot in her hand, its kernels plump and glistening with butter. She turned it slowly, inspecting it as though it might reveal its secrets before she dared take a bite. "Are you really going to try that?" Gerda asked, half mocking, half intrigued. Hilda gave a wry smile. "If it's good enough for cows, perhaps it's good enough for me." Her teeth sank into the first row of kernels with a soft pop, and then silence. The flavor hit her tongue in a rush, sweet, smoky, buttery, and unbelievably rich. The kernels burst like little packages of sugar and sunlight. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted. Warm and soft, but deeply satisfying. She took another bite, and another. "Mein Gott," she murmured. "It's delicious." One by one, the others followed. Curiosity won over skepticism. Gerda bit into hers with a scoff that dissolved into quiet surprise. Elsa's eyes widened as she chewed slowly, savoring every mouthful. Even Inga, who had laughed the loudest, devoured hers so quickly that Tom handed her a second ear without a word. The field that had moments ago been filled with mockery was now filled with the sound of satisfied silence, a kind of silence that needed no words. The women ate with a hunger deeper than appetite. It was the hunger of people who had been deprived not just of food, but of pleasure itself. Tom leaned on the table, grinning. "Still think it's for animals?" Hilda wiped a streak of butter from her lip and shook her head, laughing softly. "Ja," she said, "but now I am the animal." The whole group erupted in laughter. Real, full-bellied laughter that seemed to surprise even them. It had been a long time since they had laughed without fear or bitterness clinging to it. The war had taken so much from them: homes, families, certainty, dignity. But in that moment, something simple and human returned. The evening stretched gently as the last of the corn disappeared. The women traded small phrases of English with Tom and Bill. Tom tried a few German words, mispronouncing most of them, and earning a chorus of amused corrections. Even Jenkins relaxed, leaning his rifle against the fence as he chatted about baseball, a sport the women didn't understand but listened to anyway. As twilight deepened, Hilda found herself staring at the Peterson farmhouse. The porch light glowing softly, the sound of a radio drifting through an open window, the smell of cooling earth and harvest in the air. It was a world so ordinary, so safe, that it almost felt like fiction. Strange, isn't it? Gerda said quietly beside her. "What?" "To laugh. To eat. With them." She nodded toward the Petersons and their son. If someone had told me last year that I would sit at a table with Americans and enjoy their animal feed, she smiled faintly, I would have called them mad. Hilda nodded. Maybe the world has been mad enough already. They stood there for a moment, neither prisoner nor captor, neither enemy nor ally, just two women under a vast Midwestern sky, full for the first time in months. And somewhere, deep inside, Hilda felt a small, fragile thing stirring. Hope, perhaps, or the faintest hint that the walls between them might not be as tall as she had believed. The first taste came slowly. A cautious nibble on the edge of an ear of corn. A hesitant experiment born of curiosity, rather than trust. Yet once the German women felt the buttery sweetness bloom on their tongues, caution vanished. What followed was a silence, unlike any they had known since their capture. Not the silence of fear or despair, but the kind that falls when the senses are utterly consumed. Hilda was the first to break it. "Mein Gott," she whispered again, softer this time, almost to herself. "It is sweet." She had expected the taste of grain, coarse, dull, perhaps bitter, but this was something else entirely. It was sunshine distilled into flavor, smoke and salt, woven into a symphony of warmth. The kernels burst beneath her teeth, releasing a sweetness that reminded her of childhood summers in Saxony before the war, before the ration books and the air raids and the grief. It was a memory she hadn't visited in years. Running barefoot through fields, her mother laughing from the porch, the air heavy with ripening wheat. She swallowed, and for a fleeting moment, she wasn't a prisoner, wasn't a nurse patching up shattered bodies. She was a girl again. Across the table, Gerda took a slow, deliberate bite, her brow furrowed, as though she were trying to solve a puzzle. I don't understand," she murmured, her lips glistening with butter. "It is animal feed, and yet it is wonderful," Elsa finished, giggling like a schoolgirl, a sound that startled her as much as anyone. She quickly covered her mouth, embarrassed by her own laughter, but it was too late. The sound was contagious. Inga laughed next, then Marta, and soon the whole group was chuckling, not mockingly now, but joyfully, helplessly, as if something inside them had cracked open. Tom grinned from ear to ear. "Told you it was good." "You were right," Hilda admitted, lifting the cob like a glass in a toast. "I owe you an apology." Tom waved it off. "Nah, it's the corn that deserves the thanks." As they ate, the mood shifted from suspicion to warmth. The women who had spent weeks speaking in whispers and sharing glances of silent defiance now talked openly, even teasing one another. Language barriers melted under the shared experience of good food and unexpected delight. "Do all Americans eat this?" asked Gerda between bites, her German words translated haltingly by Jenkins. Tom nodded. "All the time, especially in summer. Picnics, fairs, church socials, even ball games sometimes." "Ball games?" Elsa asked, confused. "You eat this at sports?" "Sure," Tom said. "You hold the cob with one hand and cheer with the other." The image made the women laugh again. The absurdity of cheering at a game with butter-slicked fingers. But beneath the laughter was something more. A dawning realization that life here was so different from what they had known. War had made food a ration, not a pleasure. Bread was hard, sugar scarce, meat a rare luxury. To see something as humble as corn treated as a joyous treat was almost inconceivable. "Back home," Hilda said thoughtfully, "we fed this to pigs, and here," Tom replied, "we feed it to families." That simple sentence lingered in the warm evening air, heavier than anyone expected. It spoke of the vast gulf between their worlds, and yet in some strange way, of how easily that gulf could be bridged. After the last bites were taken and the cobs stripped bare, Bill brought out a small bowl of salt and a stick of butter, still soft from the sun. "More?" he offered, gesturing to the grill. Most of the women, to their own surprise, nodded eagerly. Some even licked their fingers before accepting a second ear. Gerda, who had once refused even to touch an American biscuit, now devoured her corn with unabashed hunger. Inga, cheeks flushed from laughter, asked Tom, in broken English, how to make it herself. Elsa, ever quiet, closed her eyes with each bite, savoring it like a prayer. The Petersons watched all of this quietly. Bill, a man of few words, felt something shift in the air. Something subtle but profound. These weren't faceless enemies anymore. They were women with hunger, with humor, with memories and families. And to the German prisoners, the Americans were no longer captors holding them behind wire fences. They were farmers, hosts, even, impossibly, friends. It was Jenkins who noticed it first. The fence between them had ceased to matter. The invisible wall that separated guard from prisoner, victor from vanquished, had dissolved under the simple act of breaking bread. Or in this case, breaking corn. As dusk settled, the fire burned low, and the evening cicadas began their shrill chorus. The women leaned back on the benches, full and content in a way they hadn't been for years. Conversations flowed more easily now, some in English, others in German, many a blend of both. Tom showed them how to roast marshmallows on sticks, a strange, sticky ritual that made them laugh until their bellies hurt. They taught him a simple folk song from their village days, and he hummed along clumsily, earning applause for the effort. At one point, Hilda found herself standing alone by the fence, watching the last light fade over the fields. The rows of corn stretched endlessly into the distance, neat, orderly, golden. It struck her how different this land was from the ruins of Dresden or the scarred countryside near Leipzig. Here there was no rubble, no bombed-out skeletons of churches. Life had not just continued, it had thrived. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Bill's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, hat in hand, looking out over the same horizon. "Yes," she admitted. "It is very beautiful." He nodded, chewing on a piece of straw. "Takes work to keep it that way." Hilda considered that. "Work," she echoed softly. "Yes. Maybe that is what we all have to do now." Their eyes met for a brief moment. Two people on opposite sides of a brutal war, yet united by something as simple and universal as the land beneath their feet. It was a fleeting connection, but it was real. As the group prepared to return to the camp, Tom handed Hilda one last ear of corn, wrapped in paper. "For later," he said, smiling. She hesitated before accepting it. "Thank you," she replied in English, carefully pronouncing each word. "Gern Geschehen," he answered, grinning at his attempt at German. She laughed, a real laugh, unburdened and bright, and tucked the corn gently into her satchel. As the truck rattled away under the rising stars, the women sat quietly, each lost in her thoughts. The war was over, but its scars were deep. Yet tonight, those scars had softened. The world felt a little less divided, a little more human, and all because of a food they had once dismissed as fit only for animals. Hilda glanced at the wrapped ear in her lap. It was still warm, its buttery aroma filling the back of the truck. She smiled to herself, realizing that the simplest things, a kind word, a shared meal, a bite of something unexpected, had the power to change everything. And perhaps, she thought, peace would begin not with treaties or speeches, but with something as humble as grilled corn. The truck rattled back toward the camp under a sky painted with twilight blues and the faintest silver of early stars. The air was cooler now, soft against the women's faces after the heat of the day, carrying with it the scent of turned earth and distant hay. No one spoke much. The laughter and chatter of the afternoon had quieted into a thoughtful silence, each woman wrapped in her own reflections. Hilda held the paper-wrapped ear of corn gently in her lap. It was cold now. The butter congealed, but the faint sweetness still clung to it, filling the truck with a smell that made her chest ache. It wasn't hunger. It was something deeper, a longing she hadn't dared to feel in years, a longing for ordinary days, for shared meals without fear, for a world that didn't divide people into enemies and allies, conquerors and conquered. Gerda was the first to break the silence. "Strange," she said softly in German. "For a few hours, I forgot we are prisoners." Elsa nodded, her eyes fixed on the darkening fields rushing past. "I forgot we were enemies." "Were?" Inga repeated, almost tasting the word. Past tense. They all fell silent again. None of them could bring themselves to say what they were thinking. That perhaps enemy was too small a word for what had been between them, and too heavy a word for what might lie ahead. Back at the camp, the routine resumed. A roll call at the gate, a search of their satchels, the clang of the iron gate closing behind them. Yet something had shifted. The barracks no longer felt quite so suffocating. The faces of the guards seemed less like masks and more like people. Even the familiar rattle of the mess hall pots that night seemed somehow warmer. Hilda unwrapped the leftover ear of corn carefully and placed it on her bunk. She had no intention of eating it. Not now. It was a keepsake, a reminder of something that could not be fully explained. The taste of kindness in an unexpected place. That night, she dreamed for the first time in months. Not of air raids or hospital wards, but of a long summer table beneath a Midwestern sky, laughter in a language she didn't fully understand, and a boy, with a crooked smile, handing her a plate, as if she had always belonged there. Weeks turned into months. The harvest shifted from corn to soybeans, from summer to autumn. The women were assigned to other farms, other tasks, sorting apples in a barn that smelled of cider, stacking hay under the sharp scent of rain. But something of that day at the Petersons lingered in all of them. It had planted itself quietly and stubbornly, like a seed in rich soil. They began to look forward to their work assignments, not because the labor was easy, it wasn't, or because they were free, they weren't, but because they had begun to discover that America was more than its barbed wire and watchtowers. It was a place where people smiled at them, offered them water on hot days, sometimes even asked questions about their lives, and they, in turn, began to offer something back. A smile, a word of English, a song hummed under their breath as they worked. Small gestures, human gestures. One chilly afternoon in late October, Bill Peterson visited the camp with a bag of apples from his orchard and a note scrawled in his careful handwriting. "Thank you," it read simply, "for your help with the harvest." It was signed by his wife, his son Tom, and even by their old sheepdog, Daisy, whose paw print was stamped clumsily at the bottom. The women gathered around the note as if it were a rare artifact. "They thanked us," Elsa said in disbelief. "Us, prisoners." Hilda traced the paw print with a fingertip and smiled. "No," she said, "not prisoners. People." Winter came early that year, dusting the Iowa fields with frost and painting the windows of the barracks with delicate feathers of ice. Rumors began to circulate that they would be repatriated soon, sent home on ships that would cross the Atlantic, back to a Germany none of them recognized anymore. Some were excited, counting the days. Others were afraid. Home was rubble, starvation, ghosts. On their final Sunday before departure, the Petersons returned one last time. This time to the camp itself. Bill brought a basket of food from their farm. Tom carried a stack of ears, husked and wrapped, still warm from the fire. It was a farewell gift, humble and sincere. "We thought you might like to taste it one more time," Bill said, his German a little better now. Hilda accepted an ear with trembling hands. Around her, the others did too. They ate in silence, savoring each buttery bite. There was no laughter this time, no teasing about animal feed, only a quiet gratitude, heavy and deep. When they had finished, Tom approached Hilda. From his pocket, he pulled a small folded photograph, a picture of the Peterson family standing in front of their farmhouse, the cornfields stretching out behind them. On the back he had written a single word: friend. Hilda stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at the boy who, months earlier, had teased them with a smile and a piece of grilled corn. She reached into her satchel and pulled out something of her own, a tiny embroidered handkerchief she had sewn during the long, empty evenings in the barracks. She pressed it into his hand without a word. "Danke," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. The ship that carried them home left New York Harbor under a gray February sky. As the coastline shrank into the horizon, Hilda held Tom's photograph between her fingers. Around her, the women spoke of the future, of rebuilding, of finding their families, of what life might be like in a Germany that had to start from nothing. But Hilda's thoughts drifted back to an Iowa field in summer, to the smell of roasting corn and the sound of laughter shared between people who had once called each other enemies. She realized then that the memory would stay with her, not just as a story to tell, but as a lesson. That hatred, like hunger, could be eased by the smallest acts of humanity. That peace could grow from the most unexpected soil. That sometimes the first step toward reconciliation was as simple as sitting down together and sharing a meal. And perhaps, she thought, that was the true victory. Not one won on battlefields or written into treaties, but one earned quietly, around a fire, over something once dismissed as animal feed. Epilogue. Years later, letters crossed the Atlantic between Iowa and a rebuilt Germany. They were filled with news of harvests, of births and weddings, of ordinary life. Sometimes, Hilda sent photographs of her garden, where she grew a small patch of sweet corn every summer, and every autumn, when the ears were ready and the air was just beginning to cool, she would roast them over an open flame, brush them with butter, and remember, she would laugh softly as the golden kernels cracked between her teeth, and whisper to herself with a smile, "Das ist Viehfutter," and every time the words tasted a little more like peace.